buddy. I'm Pug. I have one eye. Hello. All right, so welcome everybody to the show. Mike here with The Social Life of Language. Today we'll be speaking with author Sylvia Sierra of House Georgetown, first of her name, and Professor of Dragons. And we'll be talking about her new book, Millennials Talking Media, Creating Intertextual Identities in Everyday Conversation. So let's all give a warm round of applause to author Sylvia Sierra. Hi Sylvia, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mike. Thanks so much for having me on your YouTube channel.
All right, so let's get right into it. First and foremost, are you one of the video game figures on the cover of the book?
I am not on the book, actually, but a lot of the participants are on the book. So if you look at the cover from the left, we have Paula. She's the one who actually painted this mural on the house where she lived with the housemates where I did a lot of my recording. So Paula is there holding the paintbrush. Next to her, to the right, is her partner, Todd, I believe is the pseudonym in the book. Next to him is another girl who actually had moved out by the time I had started recording. So we could pretend that she's me. Then next to her is Dave, my partner, who I was visiting at the house a lot. And then next to him is Jeff. And then next to Jeff are Paula and Todd's two Bengal cats. And this was just perfect to use for the book cover because Paula had painted it before I started recording conversations and doing any kind of analysis. But once I started looking at how these housemates and other friends in this group referenced video games in conversation, this mural just highlighted how much they really identify with video games as she painted them as video game characters. Right. So, they quote games like Minecraft, The Oregon Trail, Papers, Please, other games, RPGs. So this was just the perfect cover for the book. And I'm so glad that Paula anonymously decided to let us use this for the cover.
So let me see if I understood the core idea of the book. It talks about how media references are deployed in face-to-face conversation, and then how people who are often identified as millennials produce a group identity by making connections in everyday talk to pieces of old media and pieces of new media. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's essentially right. And that's the main point of the book. I really wanted to show both the form and the function of these media references. Mm-hmm. So you just spoke more to the function, and kind of building up to that, I go over the form. So how do people phonetically signal in spoken English, which is what my data consists of, that they're making a media reference in the first place so that people can hear that something is being referenced. So I look at things like vowel lengthening and loudness and word stress. The flip side of that is how does someone show that they've understood a media reference? So how do they show that they got it? So that could be laughter, it could be repetition, playing around with it. I build up to the function of these references, which, sometimes they're just made for fun. It's really fun to reference media. But I found that they often occur at these really interesting places where there's some kind of awkward interactional dilemma happening. For instance, if one participant in the group doesn't have the same knowledge required to participate in a certain topic, and maybe that topic is a little awkward or unpleasant in the first place. So for example, there was a camping trip a bunch of us had gone on. And in one conversation, we're telling about it. And this camping trip was kind of a disaster. And this other person wasn't there. And this camping trip involved a river crossing. It involved a head injury, my head injury, actually. And this other participant says, sounds like a bad Oregon Trail trip. So right there, you get that video game reference, which allows him to participate in something he doesn't really have the same knowledge about. And it's something that allows us to laugh and bond as millennials who all played that video game growing up in the 90s at school.
We should totally change old media to retro media.
I like that sounds actually.
Way cooler. That probably sounds pretty old too. So we should probably try to give some kind of mini explanation to what intertextuality is, a word that gives all graduate students nightmares. I can start. I would say that intertextuality is the repetition of some piece of text that is perceived as making a connection with another piece of text. And by making that connection, it potentially changes or alters the direction of any conversation in real time. So for example, when I listed off your totally and completely real credentials at the beginning of the video, Some might have noticed that that was a Game of Thrones reference. What sort of effects could that intertextual connection have on our conversation?
So I think you essentially defined intertextuality correctly. We could even simplify it more and just say that it's any repetition of a shared prior text. So that's from A.L. Becker. And Deborah Tannen actually just says that any kind of repetition is intertextuality. So that simplifies it even more. And then going to the Game of Thrones reference that you made at the start of this video, well, on the one hand, that is a good way to frame the interaction as something that is kind of playful. It's a good way to start a video where that start could potentially be awkward, and it just gives a nice frame to it. And it also just kind of bonds us together as millennials, as many of us either read that book and we watched the show. So it kind of frames this whole interaction as one that's kind of playful, light, and it bonds us as millennials.
Okay, so just to be super clear, because this really confused me for like years. We don't have to directly repeat a text word for word to establish an intertextual connection, correct?
That's right. And you can just repeat word for word. For example, your favorite line from a film or TV show, you can certainly quote that verbatim, and that's intertextual, of course. But I think it's actually more interesting the way that people will alter pieces of these texts to fit the current interaction. So I'll give you an example. In the book, at one point, it's a group of graduate students, and somewhat ironically, we're actually talking about the word intertextuality, and we're joking a lot about it and making puns about it. At one point, Dave references the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and in that film, the character Frankenfurter, he sings a song where he says, "I'm a sweet transvestite."
I'm just a sweet transvestite from transsexual Transylvania.
Now, my partner Dave misremembered that line, thought it was "I'm a sweet transsexual," which is the more commonly used words nowadays. But he replaced that word in this conversation and says, "I'm a sweet intertextual." So that shows altering a piece of the text, but you can still easily link it back to the original text. One more example of this would be using a character's voice, but changing the words to something that character probably never said. So in another example, Paula is talking about the cats again, and they play a very important role in the book. That's why they're on the cover. She says something like, "I have no desire to be snuggled." And she's saying that with Worf's voice from Star Trek, but you can still trace that intertextual text because she's using Worf voice.
Klingons do not pursue relationships. They conquer that which they desire.
Okay, so last question. I wanted to talk about the process of writing this book, because one of the first things I thought was, oh, awesome, an ethnography of your own friend group. That sounds like fun. And then chapter 4 arrives, where you basically have to break down references to memes that use racial stereotypes. And I realized that this could get real awkward real fast. Could you speak to the complexity and kind of weirdness of recruiting your friends as research participants?
Yeah, so at first it definitely started out just all fun and games, recording my friends. They loved it, had no problem with it. And then at some point, once I started looking at the stereotypes, it did start getting very ethically tricky. And it was interesting to see a range of reactions from participants, how some of them felt about that more critical analysis. Some were less comfortable with that than others. But in the end, having discussions with them about this, I think kind of raised everyone's awareness about what a problem this is, that our media is just so infused with these stereotypes. We're not even conscious of it. So when we just unthinkingly quote our favorite movie or video game or meme, we're often reproducing those latent stereotypes. And just becoming aware of this, I think, can change a lot. So I noticed some people, after they would make a reference, and there's an example of this in the book, they would immediately afterwards kind of critique it and say, oh no, we shouldn't say that. It's racist, for example. And in the book, I kind of tried to focus more on the linguistic behavior of these individuals rather than to critique or blame the individuals themselves. Right. And I hope it's just something we can all learn from. It got tricky, especially, it made me realize this is why people who do the kind of work I do with family and friends, they tend not to get very critical. And that's something I didn't understand until I started doing that critical analysis. And then I was like, oh, now I get why people don't do this. But at the same time, I couldn't just ignore all these. Some of them are really kind of glaringly obvious.
All right, so that was all the questions. Thanks for coming on the show and giving us kind of a sneak preview of the book. Once again, the book is called Millennials Talking Media, available in all the places that sell books. Sylvia Sierra, everyone.
See, bye, Pug. Bye, Pug.